So over the past several weeks, I've done a ton of PSP content on the channel. I've talked about why I think the PSP is still very much relevant and a very playable system. I've talked about my personal approach to collecting and restoring a ton of games that I'd lost over the years. I talked about some of the best bang for the buck games that you can pick up if you're new to the PSP. I've talked about like weirder, sort of hidden gem style games, I guess you would say, for the PSP. But what I wanted to talk about today is actually, did I learn anything through this entire ordeal, considering I've spent basically the past 2 months doing nothing but focusing on the PSP? And the answer is yes, I have learned some things, and that's what I wanted to talk about today, are some of the things that I learned about collecting and tips that I wanted to put out there. If you're somebody who is just new to PSP collecting, or if you're somebody who has, like me, neglected PSP collecting for a very long time and you're getting back into it, these are some of the things that I discovered along the way. And really I broke this down into a few different bullet points or sections, I guess. The first is, tips for just collecting games and finding them out in the wild locally. The next would be finding them online. And then finally I wanted to talk a little bit about just keeping your collection nice and tidy and making sure that, everything looks good and that your collection's in the best possible shape if you're somebody who pays attention to that kind of thing like I do. So first, let's talk about some of the ways to get good deals on games. Now the good news is, PSP is not a super expensive system to collect for right now. Maybe at some point in the future that'll change, but by and large most games can be found at a reasonable price, usually at $60 or less, and in a lot of cases way cheaper than that. Like, yes, there are outliers like, Persona 3 that do demand an absolutely premium price, but for the most part I think the PSP is a really great system to collect for because it's fairly affordable, and again, there are just a lot of great games for it. So starting with trying to find good games, one of the first things that I would recommend is to hit your local shops first. Now this might seem like kind of a no-brainer, but it's one of those things like you can't just walk into like a GameStop, for example, and find PSP games because they just don't really sell them anymore. So I would definitely recommend checking your local shops first because oftentimes you can find a lot of great PSP games, again, at a really good price. Plus, most of the time I would advocate shopping locally anyways, one, just because it's awesome to help small businesses, but then two, it is nice to be able to inspect the games directly because it is an optical-based media, so those games can still get scratched and get messed up and dinged up, and it's always nice to be able to kind of review that and take a closer look at it in person than just sort of trusting somebody's word online. And a lot of times local shops will also run specials on specific retro games. I know Play, one of the local shops that I go to all the time and hang out with my buddy Brandon at, usually has, sales that they'll do from week to week where they, take 20% off PSP games or something like that. Usually they'll have like some kind of a newsletter you can sign up for to get alerted to that kind of information. But yeah, you can find really good deals. And the other thing that I like about shopping locally is a lot of people will trade in their old games periodically, and obviously that works out for you because games that otherwise might not be in the normal rotation that you would see on store shelves will start filtering in from week to week. And because basically all PSP games are going to be used at this point, this means that every time you go back, you're likely to find something new and something that somebody just decided to trade in, which again might fill a gap in your collection. Although I have to say, I think the PSP is starting to hit that sweet spot where people who collect them are holding onto them and they're not trading in quite as often, and you're not always going to be able to find the game that you're looking for in a local shop no matter how hard you try. So at that point, you might be tempted to go ahead and turn to eBay, which I have done. I've ordered a fair amount of PSP games from eBay, but I will say it's been a bit of a mixed bag, and here's some of the things that I've learned from that experience. For starters, just because a game looks like it's in perfect shape does not necessarily mean that it is. Case in point, one of the games that I bought actually looked completely fine in the photos, but when I got here I found that the actual outer housing of the UMD was actually starting to split apart, and that's something that you just wouldn't have been able to tell from photos until you actually have it in hand to try to pop it out of that little plastic clip that's on the inside of PSP cases. So I'm not saying that, you're doomed to get like a bad UMD or anything like that if you shop on eBay, far from it. Most of my experience has been positive, but again, I think that's another reason to maybe seek out locally where you can take a look at things directly before you purchase them. And something else to be aware of when shopping online is just really be careful and take a really close look at that listing and what is depicted and what's supposed to be provided, because sometimes if it seems like it's too good of a deal to be true, it probably is. Not always, but one of the things that I found is that sometimes what will happen is people will go ahead and put a game up and it will look like it's complete in box, but it's actually missing the instruction manual or an insert or something like that. Or sometimes people put like a very, very expensive game, but it doesn't technically have the right region code, so you might think that you're buying the North American version when you're actually buying the Japanese version. Just a lot of weird stuff to kind of keep an eye out for. So if you're going to buy from someone, make sure that you check out what their seller history's been like, if they're a well-reviewed seller, obviously, and you really take that stuff into account, especially if you're going to be seeking out a game that is rarer, harder to find, and in turn more expensive. Definitely makes sense to make sure that you have those details correct. Also, something else that I really didn't notice because I hadn't really paid attention to PSP collecting for such a long time is that sometimes whenever you buy a game that's complete in box, that may be the case, but it might not actually be in an official UMD housing. That's because sometimes that external UMD housing can crack, and there actually are replacement housings that you can buy in places like Amazon or on eBay and kind of reshell the UMD to make sure that it's functional again if you want to drop it into a disk drive. But this was something that I didn't realize, so a couple of games that I bought had actually been reshelled. Now, it's not a huge deal if you're just buying games to play predominantly, which is normally the route that I go. It's not like the end of the world or anything like that, but if you are kind of a purist and you like your collection to be as pristine or as close as it was to retail when it first launched, then you might want to keep an eye out for that, because if you see a UMD that has just like a completely clear casing, that's not going to be the original UMD that it came in. As far as I know, no UMDs were actually shipped to retail that actually had clear housing. They always had like that white sort of housing around it with the actual UMD logo stamped on it, so that's something else to be aware of as well. So I've already talked a little bit about like the pros and cons of shopping locally and shopping online, but there are actually some hybrid scenarios that I ran across as well. For example, if you're somebody who likes to get games that are complete in box, that means, that has the original manual, maybe the inserts as well, depending on how much of a purist you are, the original game in fairly good shape, and that, the case is not going to be all messed up or anything like that. One of the things that you can do is buy a game loose from either online or in person, and then you can actually look for the case and the inserts separately. And I actually did this a couple of times. One was actually with Jeanne d'Arc, which I've talked about a few times on this channel, where I found it loose at one of my local shops, and then somebody was selling the case and the manual and the inserts online. Now, I think total, like if you bought that complete in box, I think it goes for around $60 right now, but I was able to find the game loose for about 20 bucks, then buy all the inserts and the case for about 20 bucks, so I ended up saving about 20 bucks and picking up Jeanne d'Arc. So again, if you're a real stickler for making sure that you have everything complete, there are ways to go about that that don't involve finding the entire thing complete in one spot. You can always cobble it together after the fact by, again, like maybe finding a loose disc online or one in person, and then just, finding the inserts, case, or anything else that you want to complete it somewhere else. And while we're on the subject of being a stickler for completeness, let's go ahead and talk about keeping the collection tidy, or just some tips for making sure that the cases look nice and everything. And I think that's probably a good place to start, is actually the UMD cases. And the thing about these is, just like any other game you've ever seen pre-owned from like a GameStop or any place else, sometimes you will find exactly that game you're looking for and the case is all busted up. Maybe it's cracked, torn, the outside plastic is warped, maybe the art is faded. But when it comes to the cases themselves, which often can be coated in like sticker residue and all kinds of other nastiness, you actually can buy replacement PSP cases on Amazon and eBay. And I think I actually found a place where I got, I think 10 of them for like 15 bucks or so, I want to say. I'll drop a link below if you want to check those out. But I found a lot of games, especially the ones that I got from eBay, which technically included everything, but the cases were just in really rough shape and kind of gross, and just didn't have that like clear, nice sheen on the exterior plastic that I like to see in my collection. So I actually went to the trouble of ordering about 10 or 15 of these things to kind of swap out some of those cases. And that's helpful because some of the cases, they're not in the worst shape in the world, so it's kind of nice to have backups in case you do find a loose game out somewhere and you just want to temporarily keep it protected. But yeah, that's an easy way that you can kind of like punch up the presentation of your collection a little bit, make sure all of the nice artwork and everything is protected, especially if it's a rare, harder to find game or one that you really want to have in your collection. It's really helpful to just go ahead and grab some fresh cases. Now, another way that you can do this that I found, it's almost like a cheat, is there actually is a kind of a budding collector's community for UMD movies, which is crazy to me because, there are so many better ways to watch movies, and I've never felt about movies the same way I do about collecting video games, but there are a lot of people out there who are really into collecting UMD movies on the PSP, and in turn, there are a lot of people on eBay in particular that are just selling like a lot of movies, not like a lot like numerous, like literally like 10 or 15 movies at once, like that kind of lot. And if you really don't care about the movies, sometimes they're selling those at really cheap prices, sometimes even cheaper than it would be just to buy replacement cases themselves. So you could always just buy a lot of UMD movies and then just, take the movies out, let them be loose if you really don't care about collecting them, like I don't particularly care about collecting them. And then you could also just sort of gut them and repurpose those cases to, hold your collection, which you may hold to be, more dear or more important to you, which is, again, kind of my approach. And the other tip that I would have for kind of keeping the collection nice, which is almost completely counterintuitive to collecting at all, would be to look into emulation or just running the games as ISOs. Now, hear me out, I realize that sounds just, again, completely at odds with everything that I would advocate for as a physical collector, but one of the nice things about actually just running an ISO of your game from the memory stick is, one, it saves wear and tear on the disc itself, right? The less you're actually, popping UMD out of its case, the less likely you are to actually start to see that housing crack in half like happened to one of my games. But then also, you're also kind of saving the life of your PSP itself, because the less times that laser has to actually read what's on disk, the longer it's going to stay in good shape. So I'm not saying to never play a game off the disc, but to be fair, it is demonstrably less efficient, right? It takes more battery power, it puts more wear and tear on the moving parts for the UMD drive. So in that way, in a lot of cases, even though I advocate for physical collecting, I would almost save actually playing off the UMD for the games that, you personally find to be really special or ones that are, really important to you. Like, I would not want to just, burn up my UMD drive or increase the wear and tear on my system, I guess I would say, with a bunch of games that are just so-so or that I don't really care about that much when I can just run them directly off of a memory stick. But for certain games, if I really wanted like the pure experience that I would have had in 2005, 2006 before, that kind of became way more widespread, then that is when I would probably just, play a game directly off the UMD drive. Again, I'm not saying everything, and it's not like if you just pop one UMD in, it's going to, destroy your system or anything like that. But if you are trying to keep your collection nice and you just want to make sure that your hardware lasts as long as it can, is there a real reason? Maybe this completely betrays the entire idea of PSP collecting, but it is something worth considering, right? And it's something that I often do, is I'll just, play the ISOs of the games. But again, I continue to physically collect for it because, well, I just like the physical act of collecting. But yeah, those are some of the tips, or just some of the things that I learned as I've continued to cobble my collection back together over the past couple of months. And there's a lot of great information online too, right? Like, you can find communities on Reddit or here on YouTube of people who are just really nuts about the PSP. So you can find out all kinds of interesting things, whether it comes to, again, like hardware modding or collecting for the PSP or just the best games that, you'd never heard of before. And I spent so much time completely immersed in that, and it's just been a really fun ride. But hey, if you have any tips about collecting for the PSP in particular, I would love to hear about them. Let me know in the comments below. And even though I've had a whole lot of fun doing stuff specifically with the PSP hardware over the past couple of months, I will be kind of changing direction a little bit to the Steam Deck that I've got back here, because I may or may not have been playing a fair amount of PSP games on the Steam Deck now that that is something that I can do. But yeah, those are videos that are going to be coming down the pike in the next few weeks. As always, thanks for taking the time out of your day to watch. I really appreciate it. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.